Are we ready? So we wish to release a small statement regarding the state of affairs here and some of the things we are doing with respect to preparations for combating the COVID-19. I wish to start. The county government of Nakuru is happy with the restrictions placed by the national government on travel from the major counties that have been affected by COVID-19. The move is aimed at reducing movement of persons from areas of high risk and thereby cushioning rural populations. We shall partner with the security agencies to patrol our entry points and ensure that only vetted categories are allowed. And I think at this stage we would want to say that the allowed categories are very specific. It's about food, emergency supplies, including health, and any other category that is necessary for the survival of the populations during this particular time. And as a county, we will invest in adding patrol vehicles in those particular areas to ensure compliance with the directive by the head of state. We shall also partner with neighboring counties like Nyandarua and Narok, because our county is also a frontier county to the western part of the country, and the entry could be through directly Nakuru, through Narok, and also through Nyandarua. So we'll be working closely with these two counties to ensure that even their borders are properly manned and that there's no infiltration of persons who do not fit this description. Allow me further to state that the impact of COVID-19 in counties continues to be felt through reduced economic activities and dwindling revenue sources. The month of March is very critical in the county revenues, as most organizations pay their licenses in the first quarter. Nakuru in particular is the home of SMEs, or small business enterprises, and in the whole of Kenya, we are the biggest in terms of the catchment for SMEs. And consequently, this is the category that has been most affected by this closure. With the closure of many businesses and a dramatic decline in returns, many are unable to keep afloat with their obligations, including payment of licenses and other obligations to the county. The county has an obligation to listen to these business concerns, and hence we will be adjusting our budgets to reflect this financial reality. The drop in revenue will reflect in reduced implementation of budgeted projects. In Nakuru, for example, we expect that the drop will hit about 800 million shillings. Because counties have to operate and offer essential services, it is important for residents who are financially able to honor their obligations in order to cushion the vulnerable segments of the society. Escalating health costs and protection of vulnerable groups will have a heavy load on counties, and therefore we must all act together to overcome this situation. So in short, what we are simply trying to say is that for businesses that are not adversely or directly affected by the COVID situation, our plea to them would be to ask that by paying your obligations to the county, you're also helping the county to meet its obligation with respect to healthcare provision and other areas, including support for vulnerable members of the society. We also wish to note that despite concerted efforts by the government in the fight on COVID-19, there is a glaring gap in appreciation of these measures by a segment of the population. We must all invest in behavior change, because behavior change is essential for us to combat COVID-19. The tendency by a section of us to use the poor state of the economy as a justification for non-compliance must be discouraged at all costs. The burden of disease will have far more devastating consequences on poor nations than on rich nations. As evidenced in the USA, areas with poor social and health infrastructure will bear a heavier burden than the affluent neighborhoods with better healthcare infrastructure. As a result of these findings, we wish to urge persons from all segments, and especially we are saying this because sometimes when you've taken very drastic actions, people have felt that it is cruel and targeting some of the vulnerable groups. But I think it's good to note that we are doing it for their best interests. Lastly, we wish to note that the County Emergency Response Team is conducting a baseline survey across the entire county to identify areas deserving urgent humanitarian support. We are also in the process of setting up a command center so that all activities aimed at combating COVID-19, from information to enforcing the regulations set up by the government, national government for that matter, to humanitarian support, will all be done under one arm so that there is no duplication. This will be critical. The information we get out of this baseline will be critical to ensure that support will be taken where it is most needed without duplication. Sometimes when you allow humanitarian work to go on without proper coordination, you end up over-concentrating on certain areas and other key areas may be left out. And we also want to use the structures that we are coming up with as a way of gathering information on the most vulnerable areas that need urgent attention. As you may be aware, the County Assembly is in the process of approving our supplementary budget that will improve a comprehensive support program for the vulnerable groups. We have budgeted about 250 million shillings, and we shall set up ward committees that will include different segments of the society, from the persons with disability, women, youth, and religious leaders, that can be our monitoring groups at that level, so that at any one time, if we need to deal with any situation, from the chief level all the way up, will be well covered. The support will be expedited to alleviate the suffering of groups that have shown distress at this particular time. Allow me also to take this opportunity to thank members of the public because there are certain people whom we had placed on quarantine, and there have been violations from time to time. So a person is supposed to be in their house or in a particular place as designated, but whenever there has been violations to that, members of the public have been the first ones to call us and tell us, so and so in quarantine place such and such has violated. And I think 2 days ago, we had to go and place somebody under a forced quarantine after they violated the terms of the quarantine. So this is therefore to thank members of the public and to urge them to be our eyes, because we cannot be in every place all the time, and therefore through their efforts we can also work on this. We have also said as we approach Easter that this is probably the time when we least appreciate visitors. And we will urge that for families that are far apart, that we do not want families to come together, groupings, religious or otherwise. And therefore, during this Easter, we will also hasten and increase our surveillance to ensure that there will be no group meetings, there will be no visitors coming from any other parts to have big congregations. And I think through this way, we'll achieve the desired goal of social distancing and fighting COVID-19. That is all we have for now, unless there's any question.
When the supplementary budget is being discussed, there was a big watershed of push. Slum areas and flower farm workers allocated 45 million. Who are the specific people that are being targeted in the slum areas? Because we've seen some of these
Okay. So I think the vulnerable groups, as I've said, we are already doing a survey using our administration network from the chief all the way up. And the reason we want to do this is that there are certain groups that have a higher degree of vulnerability than others. For example, persons who rely on wages and are currently out of work and have to pay rent. That is a category we consider most vulnerable. So if you're not in a rent-paying situation, if you have a farm where you get your food, if you're self-employed, maybe in agriculture, which is still running, then that would, to us, not be the first line of support. But I must say that even those who may not necessarily require food may require other support, including access to water for cleaning your hands and other mitigation that may be necessary to decongest and also keep away from the COVID. So the support may vary from a slum area to a rural area, where mainly it would be about ensuring that the community water points are well paid. And on this, allow me to say that we have supported about over 10 community water projects that had stalled. And by the time when this situation came, we were telling people to wash their hands and they're saying, where is the water? So we continue to provide water in some of these places and also to supplement access to water by the communities. The county emergency response teams are part of the bigger national team, and therefore whatever programs we implement are in consultations with those teams. The position given by the national team yesterday was that we should allow them, but train them. And in Nakuru, we've already trained them, and we shall continue to give them more awareness so that they do not expose themselves. Maybe the additional part here is that for persons who know or think that they may be within the risky category or they have traveled out, when you go to a kinyozi and expose that whole system, I think it becomes a big challenge. But at a personal level, I don't plan to visit a kinyozi. So it's really a personal decision for residents, but we will ensure that we also give them the necessary gear to protect themselves so that they can also earn a living. And this is also informed by the fact that we also need to mitigate the economic effect of the COVID on the populations. Thank you.
Tunapozungumza hivi sasa zile huduma za maji zimeshwa kama maeneo ya Faustini, maeneo ya Kalolini Iza, hakuna huduma za maji, na hapo awali walikuwa wamesema kwamba wanaotoa zile huduma wasisitishe, na juma moja sasa hawajapata. Sijui kuna mipango gani ama kuna jambo gani litafanyika ili kuwanusuru hawa ndugu zetu?
Okay. So for now, we have said that no community or section of the community should be allowed to go without water, irrespective of where they are. So we'll do everything possible. If they have piped services, we shall provide the water through the piping system. If it means we do it through tankering, taking through bowsers and so on, we shall also do that. So we'll get in touch with that specific area and see how we can work on it. And I think also maybe the point to note here is that in the days to come, if we also don't cushion our water companies, because we are giving them additional burden that they were not having before, we are telling them also for huge bills, write them off and continue paying. So I think also working with the national government, we will also see how we can caution our water companies across the country, because if you tell them to provide a service and you don't pay for that service, eventually we'll have all these water companies coming down on their knees because of a heavy financial burden.